Hi, I'm Josh. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing the books that I read in February. Okay, so right now it is March 1st and I'm filming outside because I wanted to try it. It's just above freezing and it's starting to get to me, I'm not going to lie. This month I read 18 books. One of those was a reread. The rest were all new books to me. 2 of them were ebooks and the rest were audiobooks. I'm going to go from each book, from my least favorite to my most favorite, but overall it was a really good month. I only read 18 books, which is actually a lot. I'm definitely on track for my reading goal of 100 books this year, but my goal was to read like 22 books, and I was not planning on rereading a book. So because of that, I ended up dropping 3 or 4, maybe 5 books off my TBR, which is, it's fine, really. It's just disappointing that I didn't meet my goal. Nevertheless, I think I had 3 or 4 stars and several 4.5 stars, and at least a couple, maybe 3 5 stars. So objectively speaking, it was actually a pretty damn good month. So let's get going, okay? The first book is going to be Singing and Swinging, Getting Merry Like Christmas by Maya Angelou. This is the 3rd memoir in her series of autobiographies, and I gave this 3 stars out of 5. It was the only 3 stars I gave. Everything else is higher than that. I gave it that because I did not feel like it had the same heart as her other books. And the writing style wasn't quite as poetic, and unfortunately it just didn't work for me as much. Now I've heard this is probably the worst in the series of autobiographies, so I'm looking forward to the rest of them improving. And if you want to hear more about this, I talk about it in the Blackathon Book Tag. The next book is going to be An American Marriage by T.R.E. Jones. This book is a book about the marriage between a black man and a black woman, and simply the difficulty of what it's like to try and be married as a black couple in America. That is a very general description, and I'm going to leave it at that because I think it's worth coming into this not knowing what it's about, because I thought it was a very good novel, and it brought attention to a really serious problem, and the character work in here is actually really well done, and it was a very believable story and a very heart-wrenching story. Overall, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It almost got a 4 stars. I think the only reason it didn't was probably just because the writing wasn't my forte, and as much as I appreciated the content, the topic of what they're covering, I still didn't think it didn't hit me to the core as much as I would have liked. So it's really just a personal preference. So 3.5 out of 5 stars, not a bad rating. The next book is going to be Beloved by Toni Morrison, and I read this towards the end of the month. It was one of the last books that I finished, and it was also the second Toni Morrison I read this month. And I think there were multiple mistakes there, in the sense that 1, I should have read it sooner in the month when I was less stressed out about getting through all my books, and 2, I probably shouldn't have read 2 of her books in 1 month, because they just take a lot mentally and a lot emotionally, and I just clearly was not up to giving this all the effort it took to appreciate. I recognize that there was a lot that I just missed because I was having trouble following along, keeping up with what's going on. I know this is a story of this family, of this woman and her daughter, and then this woman shows up named Beloved, and they don't understand where she comes from and why she's here. But it is, if you don't know what this is about, you should look into it, because it's definitely a modern day classic for a reason. It touches on slavery and what it was like to be a parent in the time of slavery, and some of the decisions that had to be made in that type of environment, and then trying to cope with those decisions. And for that reason, I definitely want to reread this to try and appreciate it more at a future date. And before I read any other Toni Morrison, I'll probably pick this one up first, because I want to make sure that I sort of complete it in a sense that I got everything that I wanted from it before I try and tackle another of her books. The next book is going to be The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I also gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, I enjoyed this more than Beloved because I felt like I was able to understand it better. Nevertheless, it was at a bit of a disadvantage because I started reading it when I was traveling for a gaming conference I was going to, and I found that I have trouble focusing and getting in the zone, I guess, of reading when I'm traveling, even though traveling is really the perfect time to sit down and focus, or when I'm moving around I can listen to the audiobook. But I think what it is I'm just so focused on what I have to do and everything that I have going on that I find it really hard to concentrate on the story. But when I got back home, I found myself being able to follow along a lot better. Granted, I did look up some reading aids online, and that helped as well. But by the end of it, I really enjoyed the narrative. It's basically about this woman and her sister, and the story of their life as it's told by the two of them over the course of mostly letters and journals. The story I enjoyed more was definitely the young woman who basically was in an abusive relationship as with a husband, and of course from her father as well. And then her sister story reminded me sort of Things Fall Apart or Heart of Darkness, where she spent a lot of time as a missionary in Africa. And the relationship between the two of them I really enjoyed. I read this for Blackathon 2020, or Blackathon Book Tag rather, and I talk about it there more, so I probably should stop and save my time for this video from other things. The last 3.5 stars that I have here are going to be Let's Play White by Tessie Burke. This actually wasn't that bad, but the fact is I had very high expectations going into it, and it definitely let me down. The best rating I gave in here I think was a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and maybe a couple other 4 stars, but for the most part they were 3.5s, and I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars total for that reason. I was expecting something that I could connect to more, but the fact is a lot of the stories felt kind of not well done, kind of mediocre. It's sort of like I've heard this before, not very creative. That said, the few stories I did give better ratings to were ones that I felt like were more original and an interesting take. And I will say though that this might be something still worth checking out, because she does explore race a lot more in these stories in a way that I don't think is very common for the stories that she is exploring. And obviously I felt like some of them were better than others, hence them getting better ratings. But still, I was just disappointed overall, and it didn't give me the tone I wanted. But I am intrigued enough to want to read more Tessie Burke, so I'm hoping she comes out with more books. I think this is her only one, but it's also just a great cover. So the next book is March by John Lewis and Others, which is book 1 of his comics exploring his time in the Civil War, or rather the Civil Rights Movement. This was a good comic. I didn't hate it, but I didn't much love the artwork, and I felt like there was a lot of fluff. There was a lot of build up to it, to basically see his time as a child and then going to school. But the problem was that there wasn't a lot there in his childhood. Once we got to the part where he was talking about his experience in the Civil Rights Movement, I was able to get much more engaged, and it's definitely worth reading for that reason. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to continue this until I read it, and I'm glad I did, because I definitely want to continue. I want to track and follow his experience further along. That said, I am hoping that in the future he spends less time exploring obscure parts of his childhood. Don't get me wrong, I recognize that he tried to use that to explain why he got into civil rights and being an activist, but I just felt like it was just a little bit too much of the story. But it was still good, and I really enjoyed it and connected with it in the way that I still wanted to. So 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now we're moving on to 4-star books. First one's going to be Lagoon by Nnedi Okorafor, and this is the story of basically an alien species coming to Nigeria and a place called, I think, Lagos, and she comes in contact with a few humans who she tasks with basically getting her in contact with the heads of states. And this was just a really interesting book for a number of reasons. I talk about this in my Blackathon TBR, so I'll try not to get my Blackathon book tag video, so I'll try not to get too much into it. But I think Nnedi Okorafor is just a very creative science fiction writer. I think one reason why I definitely want to read more of her books is that when I think about what I want from a science fiction book, it's something that is not too esoteric, that can still be understood and engaging without getting lost in the details, while still being not mundane and not sort of just bland or the same thing. This is definitely new material. It's a new way of thinking about this type of contact, and I thought it was just a fantastic book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And every time I talk about it, I wonder why I did that, so I might reconsider that. But I think part of it might have been just that, as much as I loved it overall and the concept, I guess I wasn't as engaged in all parts as I would have liked, and I probably brought the score down just slightly. The next one's going to be LaGuardia, also by Nnedi Okorafor, and this one is a comic that I read for the science fiction fantasy challenge for Blackathon this month, and I'm glad I did. I probably wouldn't have read it otherwise, because I don't usually seek out comics. I sought out March because John Lewis is my congressman, or because I'm from Georgia, and I'm glad I did for two reasons. One, this artwork is beautiful. The colors are so vibrant. And then two, it really brings to life the creativity that is presented in Needy Okafor's stories. And then three, I'm pretty sure this is a continuation of Lagoon, the book I just mentioned, because it's uncannily similar to the story that we're following in the book. It is, I don't want to say more than that because I don't want to spoil Lagoon, but it definitely seems like it's in the same world. I could be wrong, but it's still very intriguing, very good. It was definitely a very political, heavy book that was very much referencing modern day issues, which I think is perfectly fine. While it was heavy-handed, I still enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars just because when you have that type of heavy-handed politics, it makes it more theatrical in a way that is less of a believable story. I don't want to say it's a bad thing. It's one way of telling this type of story. I think it's fine. But for me, I guess it took down the enjoyment from a full 5 stars to maybe an 8. Sorry, a 4. But still, I highly recommend this. But of course, read Lagoon first and let me know what you think. If you have read these, let me know if you got the same impression that they're in the same world. Lastly, another 4-star book here, also by Needy Okafor, is Venti, which is the first book in her series here about this, I believe, Nigerian woman who, or at least this woman who is in a Nigerian-esque society in Africa. And this is the far future where the society is very secluded from this advanced civilization, this advanced galactic civilization, and she sort of breaks from tradition and sort of seeks out knowledge to understand and to expand. And what proceeds is just a really interesting and fascinating story. Okay, I'm halfway through it and I'm beginning to get cold. Okay, now let's talk about my 4.5-star books. Let's start with Men We Reaped by Jasmine Ward. I really like this book. It was a story, a memoir about her experience seeing 5 black men die unrelated to each other over the course of a very short period of time in her childhood. And it brings attention to the range of issues and harm that is being targeted towards the black community, and specifically black men, and what it's like to be a black man in America and trying to survive, and many of them failing to do so because of that. It's easy to blame them when they make mistakes or do the wrong things, but the fact is that it's largely to blame on the system itself. And she does an amazing job bringing attention to that, and I absolutely adored this book. It was fantastic. I don't know why I did that, but anyways, I really enjoyed it. The next one's going to be Heavy by Kais Lehman. This is his memoir about what it was like to grow up as a overweight black male or black man, and basically just follow his life. And as he talks about what it's like to try and be 1, black, and then 2, overweight, and it actually carries on into his adulthood, even after he loses the weight, and he has to try and cope with this idea and his fear of getting fat again. And it was, again, a great book covering the black experience, and as well as just what it's like to be overweight and try and deal with that, specifically as a black man. The next one is going to be The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Now, I really like this one. The first time I read it, I think I gave it 3.5 stars. The second time I gave it 4.5 stars, because this was the book I reread, and I wasn't planning on rereading it, but I ended it similarly to Beloved, except I think I understood it slightly better. And again, I did use some reading aids here, but once I finished it and I reread it, and I was able to follow along even better than the first time. And because of that, I was able to connect to it in a way I didn't the first time. And I just loved it. It is a fantastic story about black identity and this sort of harm that comes with shaming race, shaming being dark-skinned. And for a more complete description of this, I talk about it in a full review, which I will link up above in the little eye thingamajig. We are almost there, and I assure you, this hurts me more than you because it is freezing. Probably too cold for this. This is the second video I'm recording out here. That's probably why I'm getting really cold all of a sudden. The Warmth of the Other Suns by Isabel Wilkinson is a Pulitzer Prize winning novel, or rather nonfiction book, about the black migration during the Jim Crow era from the South to the North and the West Coast. I talk about this in my Blackathon Book Tag. You can go there to hear more. Needless to say, I love this book. It was very engaging. It struck me to the core of my being. It also was just very fascinating discussion of this piece of history that is so ignored in our schools. And I highly recommend everyone read this, especially people who know me personally, because I know you're probably from the same background as I am. And the fact is you probably were not exposed to this. And this really highlights the issue of racism and segregation and the effect it's had on the Black community, and even how it carries on into the modern day. The next book is going to be The Battle Cry of Freedom by James M. McPherson, about the Civil War. It's a nonfiction book, the first book I read of the month, and I really enjoyed this. Takeaway, surprise, slavery. The Civil War is about slavery. What a shocker. If you want to hear more about this, I do a full reading vlog and review about this. Finally, our final 3 books, or 5 stars. First one's going to be Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. I love this. This is a series of essays by her about what it's like to be a feminist and trying to do the right thing and make the right choices, but inevitably making mistakes at times. And I just thought this was fantastic. She has an amazing writing style. She's very engaging, very knowledgeable. She has the best way of thinking about this very important issues, and I just absolutely adore it. I can't wait to read more of her books. For example, Not That Bad, also by Roxane Gay, or edited by her, is an anthology or a collection of essays by women and men, and perhaps non-binary people, I'm not sure, who have suffered sexual assault and harassment. This book is possibly one of my favorite books of the year, probably will be, and probably my favorite book of the month. It was really hard to read, but it was also very enlightening and also a necessary book to read. I know I said that word necessary in my February TBR video, but I don't think I really appreciated what that meant. I think this is especially good for men, especially men who aren't as convinced about this idea of rape culture and toxic masculinity and patriarchy, because this brings some serious light to that, and the harm for even the small things that you might consider small, the harm they can do, and the harm this rhetoric does, this type of way of thinking that society does to women and men, and it is just very, very good. Like, my hands are tingling because of how good it is, not just because they're freezing. And lastly, the last book I read of the month, ending with minutes to spare, is of course going to be The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval. And this is a short novella about this black man in, I think, the early 1900s, basically in New York, doing a number of shady things for cash, basically. And when he does that, he comes across this dark section of New York, and what unfolds is just a bunch of Lovecraftian horror, which I was here for. If it wasn't Not That Bad, I'd probably say this is my favorite, but this was fantastic. It's exactly the type of horror I love to read. It wasn't necessarily the most creepy at times, but it was still dark and Lovecraftian, and I love this type of horror. Love, love, love it. That concludes all of the books that I read in the month of February. 18 total, 3 5 stars, I think 4, 4.5, 3 or 4, 4 stars. Like I said before, it was a fantastic reading month, even if I didn't finish all the books I wanted to. I hope you enjoyed. If so, make sure you like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments which books you read this month, and if you read any of these and your thoughts on them. And thank you, and hope you have a great day.